we have a number of species concepts that we use in different contexts. And when you look at species in the real world, species boundaries are oftentimes fuzzy, which is, of course, exactly what we would expect to see if evolution really is operating. Otherwise, you'd see individual discrete species if they were all specially created. Okay? The whole idea of typology is related to what Dawkins calls the tyranny of the dichotomous mind. You know, we tend to put things in little boxes. Now, clearly, that's oftentimes adaptive, because after all, it's a good idea if you can distinguish a gazelle from a predator, let's say. And so clearly classifying things into little boxes is adaptive. But if you want to understand the natural world, maybe it's not the concept that you want to use. Okay. Gregory rightfully points out that this sort of typological thinking minimizes the role of variation in the evolutionary process, because from a typological point of view, variation is accidental and it doesn't tie into the essence of the object or the essence of the species if you're thinking of species as objects. Okay. Next, maybe it's this previous slide now. Oh, whoops, back. Okay, probability. There are all kinds of misconceptions about probability, and one could spend a whole month doing nothing but talking about that. And Gregory doesn't address this in detail, but it needs to be mentioned. Gregory does have an interesting turn of phrase when he says in passing that natural selection is an improbability concentrator. I don't think that phrase is original with him, but I can't remember where it came from. To me, it sounds sort of like the improbability drive in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm familiar with that. But it's a valid point, and it's exactly the point that Dawkins was trying to make in The Blind Watchmaker. Dawkins, remember, wrote a little program that started out with a random sequence of letters and spaces, and the idea was to eventually have that program seek out and match the phrase, "Methinks it is like a weasel," okay? Which has a specific combination of 26 letters and spaces. At each iteration of this random program, if a letter is in the right place and in the right space, it is retained, right? Okay? So the idea is that eventually the program will converge on the little phrase, the target phrase. Now, if you're thinking about the proverbial random monkey, and I was trying to find a monkey with a typewriter here, but I couldn't, just typing away on a keyboard randomly, it would take, the probability of getting the right sequence on any single try is pretty darn low. It's like 27th, or rather 1.19 times 10 to the minus 40. So that chimp would have to type an awful long time to get the right sequence. But Dawkins' little program did it, well, when Dawkins just went to lunch and he came back and the program had done it, okay? So that's what we mean when we say that natural selection is an improbability concentrator, because it retains mutations that are beneficial. They're not eliminated. You know, clearly this is Dawkins' model is a growth simplification, and he doesn't really mean it to model natural selection, but it's designed to illustrate the power of the cumulative preservation of small changes that's involved in natural selection. Okay. Next slide. Oh, next slide. Whoops. There we go. You know, I could go on, and Gregory's paper misses some big issues, because after all, there are some really important issues. And one of them is the idea that since evolution is not directed toward a goal, people, and it's not teleological, people conflate goallessness with randomness. Okay? They're not the same thing if you think about it. You can have a process that doesn't have a goal, but it just happens to go to a particular state. Right? Diffusion would be an example of that sort of situation. Okay? And for instance, you might be familiar with the Grants who studied the finches in the Galapagos Island. They studied natural selection for beak size among the Galapagos finches. And what they found is that over a number of generations, the beak size for the finches they were studying would vary, would track the environment. lag behind the environment, but track the environment. Now, creationists sometimes will criticize this. For example, here's a quote from the Answers in Genesis website, which is one of my favorite websites, by the way. And I forget who wrote this, but the quote is that the Grant's research over many years showed that beak size in finches varies according to many factors, increasing and decreasing over time. It's not directional in any sense, which would be required for molecules to man evolution. You see their logic? There's one minor problem here. Remember, that's the slide. Here are the caterpillars operating on a very rapid span of time, right? And so time has different scales for different processes. You know, if you're looking over 5 or 6 or 10 years or 20 years in the Galapagos Islands, that's one scale. But we have obviously longer term scales related to climate change, continental drift, geological uplift, long-term changes in solar output. And these are goalless, but they're not random in any sense of the word, unless you're looking at an even bigger scale, then maybe they are, I don't know, okay? So these processes play out, next slide, over many millions of years. So I think my last slide is time is so slow. Anybody know what this is?
It's like the San Andreas Fault.
Yeah, that's the San Andreas Fault. This is from the NASA website. And as from the caption, what it looks, this is water right here, and I think this is the reservoir that feeds San Francisco. Guess where the fault is?
Right there.
Okay, right there. So we don't have a good grasp of these long time spans, and I think that creates problems, and I kind of see that with my students as well.
Bad case of urban planning.
But very bad case of urban planning. You know, and Darwin grasped the scale of time. And that was one of the things that made Darwin so powerful as a thinker, is that he understood the implications of having long spans of time for the evolutionary process. Even though we know that evolution can happen quite rapidly, it's good to have those long spans of time. Okay, well, obviously I could have said a lot more, and hopefully some of this will come up in discussion later on.